from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Sarah Lancaster featured among a panel of weed scientists discussing the expected shortage of post-emergence Burndown herbicides in the growing season ahead. They'll talk about managing around that problem through greater reliance on residual herbicide control and crop management adjustments. Also today, K-State's Andres Patrignani will talk about a new project which will establish testing grounds for soil moisture sensing technology. He and colleagues will evaluate the accuracy and the overall performance of current and future moisture sensing systems. And K-State's Gus van Der Hoeven will be in with another Stop, Look, and Listen. All that here on Agriculture Today. Welcome once more to Agriculture Today. As we've brought to your attention before, K-State weed management specialist Sarah Lancaster is co-creator of and a regular contributor to a growingly popular podcast, War Against Weeds. She and her co-hosts Joe Eichley of North Dakota State University and Mandy Bish of the University of Missouri take on topical crop weed control subjects each week, and recently they brought in even more of their peers for a really good group discussion of a subject on the minds of just about every one of you crop producers out there looking to the 2022 season: how to successfully combat weeds when important herbicides like glyphosate and glufosinate may be scarce because of these persistent supply chain issues. And here for you, we've an excerpt of that conversation. NDSU's Joe Eichley leading it off.
We're going to go around and introduce everyone here before we get into the topic for today. So why don't we start with the co-host of the podcast?
Mandy, I'm here today, Extension Scientist at University of Missouri.
Sarah Lancaster, Extension Weed Scientist at K-State.
Bill Johnson, Extension Weed Scientist at Purdue University.
Larry Steckel, Extension Weed Scientist, University of Tennessee.
Rhett Stolte, Technical Agronomist with Growmark.
All right, thank you, everyone. So, one of the big topics we wanted to kind of talk about today is the forecasted herbicide shortage as we kind of close out fall of 2021 and head into the 2022 season. When we say herbicide shortage, not across the board, not all products. And when we talk about residuals, as far as I'm hearing, really no hint of a shortage of the residual products that we like to use for our crops. Is that correct? Or
correct. I mean, the big ones that I hear about now are glyphosate and glufosinate. So, what I would call kind of the bigger players in the soybean market. But to date, they're not condundering on corn residual products or soybean residual products. But there's a lot of inert ingredients and raws sitting out on open water, so that could play into that equation a little later, but as of now, no issues that we're hearing about.
So chemical shortage is going to make us better at resistance management because we're going to have to rely on the residuals.
It's an unintended consequence.
The other non-chemical thing I was wondering about is, what about planting date? There's evidence that looks at maybe when you plant later, you might have fewer weeds to deal with potentially. Mm-hmm. And so do you think that guys should be, in light of shortages of our primary post-emergent products, do you guys need to be thinking about adjusting planting date or any other cultural practices?
So if you look at weed emergence patterns from the scientific literature, you find that weeds have a peak emergence pattern and then it tails off. And so if you can manage your cultural practices to where you take out those flushes of weeds and you have fewer germinable seeds in the seed bank, that should make your weed control problem go away, right? Or should make your weed control problem easier. Another way to think about that is, what if you can get your crop planted before that peak emergence timing, get a crop canopy, and so you end up with some weed suppression by the crop canopy. So there's a couple different ways to kind of play the game, and obviously weather conditions kind of dictate what happens. And, I've long held the belief for years that a later planting date would result in less resprays. But again, you you run the risk of some different issues with late season moisture and the things that impact yield. So I like the idea of being able to control your planting date, but the reality of the matter with the size of the farms is it's very difficult to do.
I agree completely. And this was the first year in Tennessee. Folks did this ultra early planting, which for us is like late March to first week of April. And it was surprising. And going into it, I thought, boy, it's a long, long time to have to get weed control. But it was we had about 3 winters in March and April. And it was so cool that palmer never emerged. And soybeans got some canopy in those narrow rows, and it actually worked out very well. So on the early end, I think you got some advantages there. But then on the late end, I think kind of in the middle, mid-May to mid-June, especially for palmer, is right in its wheelhouse. And soybeans can't compete then. They just can't.
But yeah, I look at some of the other weeds and like the ragweeds. And we still do have, I know especially in my neck of the woods, a fair amount of conventional tillage. And if you could delay that last tillage pass and planting date so you get past peak ragweed emergence, then that can, certainly help in the fight against ragweed. You have other weeds to worry about, of course. But I think that's where if you have the time this winter, take a look at a field-by-field basis, your most problematic weeds, and maybe you make some of those decisions on which fields to plant, not historically how you do it, but based on the weed pressure and trying to plan around some weed control considerations.
Yeah, if I were to think about my geography, if I had a field that was ate up in foxtail and ragweed, I would, and it was a field where I could get water on it in August, I would till that field up, plant it late, and miss that peak emergence timing, knowing I could put water on it. If I had a field, though, that I couldn't put water on late, but I had morning glory as a problem, so getting a crop canopy late in the year was going to be an issue, I would probably want to plant that field early and get that canopy. If I planted it late and didn't get the canopy, the morning glories would just take over.
I guess it just changes a little bit how you have to think about managing. It's all strategy, right? And
yes.
It's just what's trade-offs and what's your strategy?
All strategy and knowing what weeds you have in each field, and that's some institutional knowledge that we lose when we have really large farm sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
talk a lot about needing to know weed biology, again, more so than we had when glyphosate was around and just controlled everything.
Mm-hmm. So maybe one more thing to briefly hit on. All right, so knowing glyphosate's going to be tight, and if you can get it, probably more expensive or a lot more expensive. Same thing we're hearing with glufosinate, and probably a lot more acres of either XtendFlex or Enlist E3. What are some of the considerations for post-emergence? We're going to have to spray post-emergence at some point. And how do we optimize our post-emergence applications so we don't need a respray? And then the other things like layering in that residual herbicide to, again, hopefully avoid a respray or another pass in that field, and basically getting the product across the field the best that we can.
So, like for a herbicide like glufosinate, avoid spraying it when it's a good chance it's not going to work. So if you got a good cold snap coming through, and my cold snap's not that cold, in the 60s at night, 80s in the morning, you really want to get a little warmer than that for it to consistently work on most weeds. And the other is time of day. If you spray it of an evening or early in the morning, it isn't much different water. You spray it in the middle of the day on a hot day, it can kill some very big, tall weeds. So timing is everything with that particular herbicide, and spraying it 9 to 4 in the middle of the day on a good hot day, and avoiding spraying it early in the morning on cold days.
I was going to say the other thing that we kind of learned or relearned in our geography this year is the importance of humidity to make glufosinate work. And so, Larry, probably never a problem with you.
No,
for you.
never.
But if we had a situation where we look at the forecast and we know one day is going to have a lot more humidity than the other days, that may be the day you want to spray as many acres as you can. In our geography, where you may have a dry front come through and temperatures in the 80s and 90s with dew points down to 20s or 30s, we just know it's not going to be a very effective application if we can't get that humid day for more acres to apply.
Yeah, I mean, in Illinois, we look at it as, if we can't apply dicamba because the temperature is too high, there's a good chance that's probably leading more towards high enough temperature and hopefully some good sun and humidity that we can apply glufosinate. So I think our applicators are becoming somewhat weathermen because the amount of time they got to pay attention to weather to optimize it. And it's going to be even more important in 2022 with a shortage of it. We don't want to waste any of it by any means. So optimizing every gallon that we have of it.
Anything else we can think of, people need to know at this point in time about what we're hearing with potential shortages, increased prices next year?
I think the message I would leave people with is build your backbone around your residual herbicide, full rates of residual herbicides. Try to understand what weed problems got away from you this year as you're driving the combine through the field.
Do everything you can to make the residuals work, because there's a good chance you're going to have a hard time getting the post to work.
Try to stretch the straight goods as long as you can. You don't need to, go out with a half a gallon to the acre, but also don't lose sight of the premixes that contain glyphosate. Granted, they're not going to run the whole season and be long, but they'll last a little longer than the straight goods will. So, there's a reason that a premix is there. Sadly, not every farmer is a formulation scientist. So utilizing some of those and not trying to recreate the wheel. That's something we've been pushing a lot of our guys to go out with a message of, you have these premixes for a reason, utilize those and don't lose sight of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Have a plan B for what your source is going to be.
Right.
K-State's Sarah Lancaster among those in this open forum on managing around herbicide shortages this coming growing season. The entire podcast is worth a listen. Go online and search for War Against Weeds. It's the edition posted on October the 20th. And we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and our aim right here is to let you know about new research that our guest and his colleagues will be undertaking quite soon now. And it's about evaluating a technology which is coming on very strong in production agriculture. Joining us is Andres Patrignani. He is an assistant professor in soil water management here at Kansas State University. And Andres, what we're getting into here is soil moisture sensing technology, an up-and-coming ability. It's pretty exciting, really, isn't it?
Correct, yes. So soil moisture sensors usually allow us to quantify the amount of soil moisture, in the soil profile. And this can be used by, for a wide range of in-season decisions for producers, from irrigation scheduling to planting decisions to even defining the ability to enter in the field and do some other farming operations.
Right to the initiative that you're involved with here, it is to evaluate these technologies in effect, isn't it?
Yes, so there is a wide range of soil moisture sensors in the markets, different designs, different working principles, different price range. So what we want to do is to bring most of these technologies to a single parcel of land and to do some side-by-side comparison so that we can inform researchers and practitioners alike about the advantages and disadvantages of some of the soil moisture sensors that we have in the market right now.
And this effort was just recently announced. The Natural Resources Conservation Service is one of the key sponsors of it, you say?
Correct. Is a sponsor of this project, and there is a special focus on monitoring soil moisture as part of a dynamic soil properties initiative by the NRCS.
Noting also, before we talk about how you'll go about this, you have peers at other land-grant universities also joining in on this.
Correct. This is a multi-institutional project. K-State is a leader of this project, but we also have Texas A&M, Oklahoma State University, and the USDA ARS at Beltsville, Maryland.
Let's talk of the project, and as a prelude to that, the technology itself, its capabilities. When we say it can read soil moisture levels, would you expand on that? What can the technology in its current forms do?
Yes, so the technology, what it tells us is the amount of water in the porous matrix of the soil. Basically, how many millimeters or inches of water we have in a specific layer of the soil, let's say in the root zone of a crop. and then we can translate those measurements into some actionable decisions depending on the timing of the growing season. So these sensors usually are prong sensors that are inserted into the ground. We need to do some either excavation or some coring, get into the dirt, install the sensors. And once they are in the soil, they actually can last several years. So there is no really need to remove them unless there is conflict, say cables with farming operations like planting. Other than that, they require very little maintenance once they are deployed. That's one of the main common technologies right now. But there are also emerging soil moisture sensing technologies that are non-invasive, and they do not need to be installed into the soil, so they are much easier to move around, and they also have a much larger sensing footprint, for instance, compared to traditional prong sensors that need to be stick into the soil profile.
Those technologies that don't require the probe, what do they base their readings on? What's the mechanism at work there then?
Yeah, pretty much none of the soil moisture sensors that we have right now measure soil moisture directly. They measure some other property, and then that needs to be translated into soil moisture. These proximal sensors measure cosmic ray neutrons. So the Earth is basically being bombarded by outer space particles every day, and some of these cascades or interactions with the atmospheric atoms and molecules reach the ground, and those interactions can be picked up by some of these sensors.
It's rather fascinating technology, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks almost like science fiction, and so it's actually quite interesting that we can use some of these concepts to infer the amount of water in the soil and then translate that into, a routine decision.
Then your project, again, in collaboration with other universities, is to assess the performance of these various levels of soil moisture sensing technology. Is that correct?
Correct. So we want to test multiple properties from, the accuracy of the sensor. I think that's the one that we are all interested in, but also the longevity of the sensor, the price of the sensor, whether the sensors have wireless capabilities or not, and, how that plays with, farming operations. So some sensors might be cheap and easy to install, but they may require cables, so maybe a producer does not want to use that kind of technology.
Toward that end, you intend to establish what you're calling test beds at 4 locations in the respective states' universities participating.
Correct. So the goal is to have replication, but not in the same location, but actually across multiple states so that we can capture different soil types and different climates. A test bed is a small parcel of land where all the sensors are deployed, side by side, so that we can test them under the same conditions.
So there will be a test bed then in Kansas as well as in Oklahoma, in Texas, and in Maryland. And you say you're going to put them all side by side. What are you looking at in terms of the soil type and makeup here in Kansas for the test bed here?
The main goal that we have here is to calibrate soil moisture sensors for fine texture soils. Most of the soil moisture sensors in the market right now tend to overestimate soil moisture conditions in fine texture soils, say clay soils. And so one of the things that we want to do is develop better calibration functions, which this might not be available readily to practitioners, but the idea is to work with the private companies, the manufacturing companies of these sensors, and trying to work together so that the sensors can reach consumers already, with improved calibrations from the factory. The idea is, that part of the results that we are finding in these test beds will benefit, let's say, producers or practitioners or researchers, but it will also benefit the manufacturing companies.
Which in turn then could benefit the end user of the technology then. And again, the other states will be looking at different soil types, so you can have a cross-section of performance then.
Yes, and each soil moisture test bed will also be replicated in each site. So here in Kansas, we will have one location that we will call the soil moisture test bed, but that one will also be replicated in slightly different soils or perhaps slightly different land covers. But the main effect will be captured across states, where we can really take into account the different soil types and also benefit a much larger, region and population using these sensors.
Tied into this is something called the National Coordinated Soil Moisture Monitoring Network. What is that exactly?
Right now in the country, we have a growing number of environmental monitoring networks. Say the Kansas Mesonet will be one of those. But many of the states, say Oklahoma has the Oklahoma Mesonet, and so forth and so on. And then the National Coordinated Soil Moisture Monitoring Network is a national initiative to bring all these mesoscale networks into one single platform so that we can estimate soil moisture conditions at the national level. And there are some networks that are being coordinated by the USDA, say the SCAN, the Soil Climate Analysis Network, and it has over 200 stations across the country. And then there are statewide networks. And the idea of this project is to bring all of these together. So, and all these different networks use different soil moisture sensors. And so one of the goals here is to also provide guidance to the managers and researchers behind these soil moisture monitoring networks.
And one other facet of this, and you hinted at it, but not only will you be looking at, Andres, the existing technology at hand, but if this all plays out as anticipated, this could turn out to be a proving ground for the latest and newest soil moisture sensing technology that maybe isn't even developed yet.
Correct. Yes. So we want to be, testing existing technologies, but also emerging technologies that might be in research phases or research prototypes. That will be thinking, let's say, 5 to 10 years ahead. But we also want to have these test beds as a platform for companies or other researchers in other universities to bring their own new technologies or new devices and to have the opportunity to place these new sensors side by side with existing and proven technologies.
When are you anticipating launching the project then?
Yes, the project already started, so we are looking at different sensors, contacting the multiple manufacturers. We are getting a very good response from companies, really interesting. And the idea is to break ground around the spring break, so the mid-March of 2022.
It's going to be, by all appearances, an outstanding service, and it will help greatly advance the technology and its performance by learning more about its strengths, its shortcomings, and then moving forward accordingly. We do, of course, wish you well as this continues to come together. Andres, thanks for going over this with us. Appreciate your time right here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
He's an assistant professor in soil water management at Kansas State University. Andres Patrignani, his name, once more. K-State, along with Oklahoma State University, Texas A&M, and the USDA Agricultural Research Service out of Maryland, partnering to create this series of test beds for soil moisture sensing technology, as that technology becomes continually more important in our crop production systems. You're listening to Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
I quickly changed clothes and started planting.
That's Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
As I drove up to the house, I noticed the big box. It was a UPS delivery of fall bulbs, and they needed to be planted. With the beautiful fall weather we have had, that was no problem. The weather forecast called for rain the next day, so I quickly changed clothes and started planting. I'm glad I did, as it did rain the next day. My planting method was quick. I just used a short but heavy crowbar to create a hole in the ground. It's a quick way of doing it unless you have a large, very large bulbs. Of course, careful and proper planting bed preparation is the preferred method. But I know my way works. I expect that by now most garden stores are getting low on their choice of variety and cultivars. However, it may be well worth your time to go and take a look. There still might be a bag or two of daffodils, maybe some tulips. If you're lucky, they may be on sale now. But buy them and take them home and plant them. As you plant them, think about how cheerful they will look next spring, promising the new garden season. Don't only think tulips and daffodils and hyacinths, but also look for what we call the small bulbs, the crocus, the oxalis, the muscari, the snowdrops. And if your garden happens to have a small area with native woods, go wild and plant there. Make bold groupings. 1, 2, or 3 won't do, especially not with the small bulbs. Go 20 or 25. Woodland soil tends to be deep and rich from accumulating leaves. It is a natural protective cover for bulbs against the freezing temperatures. But here's another idea. Bring the flowering bulbs inside and enjoy them during the Christmas and dark winter days. Paper whites are the easiest to force inside. You can plant them in a container with soil or fill the pot with clean gravel. Place the bulbs among the stones so that bulbs are anchored, and if you want to see the roots grow, use a glass jar. Bring the water up to near but not touching the base of the bulbs. If you do have small children or grandchildren, show them how the bulbs grow. Explain that the food the bulb needs to grow is in the bulb. By placing the specially prepared bulbs on water, a child can see the roots grow. Then the flower bud comes, up and out. Then the flower emerges. It doesn't take that long. If you do not have a garden, here's an idea for the deck. Use a fairly deep container. Place some gravel in the very base for good drainage. Start filling with good organic garden soil and place layers of different bulbs with a thin layer of soil in between. You can place a layer of daffodils at the bottom, late blooming tulips above with soil in between, and above the tulips with soil in between a layer of muscari or crocus. It would be like a layered cake. Keep from freezing. Do not overwater, but don't let the containers dry out. Enjoy this season.
Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, featured every Wednesday right here. And so goes today's edition. Thanks to you for listening in, as always. Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.